Hi, my name's Bernadette Cairns, and I'm the Principal Officer for Additional Support for Learning and Early Education within Highland Council. I've made a brief presentation just to share with you some of the changes in roles and responsibilities that affect those staff who previously have been learning support auxiliaries or classroom assistants within Highland Council and have recently transferred to the posts of pupil support assistants. Up until recently in Highland schools, along with support for learning teachers and peripatetic specialist staff, both classroom assistants and learning support auxiliaries provided additional support to pupils with a variety of needs. Classroom assistants were first employed as part of the Early Intervention Initiative that was launched by the Scottish Executive in 1998. They were employed specifically to focus on the development of early literacy, numeracy and language skills in the infant stages, but their role grew over time, and very many of them became much more involved with individuals who had much higher levels of need. Learning support auxiliaries have always been employed to provide targeted support to individuals with more significant additional support needs. In December 2010, as a savings measure, Highland Council proposed to delete the post of classroom assistant. There was understandably a significant level of petition to the Director of Education, Culture and Sport, providing unanimous support for classroom assistants and the role that they played within our mainstream primary schools. As a result of this, on the 10th February 2011, at a meeting of Highland Council, there was a decision taken to make savings of approximately 1/3 of the budget for classroom assistants, which amounted to just over £750,000, rather than cutting the post completely. Again, further submissions were received regarding these proposals, many from parent councils, and a significant number from parents and other individuals, along with school staff. From the submissions received by the Director of Education, Culture and Sport, there was universal condemnation of the Council's decision in relation to classroom assistants. Both the original proposal to delete all posts and the revised decision to remove £751,000 from the budget, even though this would have been over 2 financial years. Across the board, people were very supportive of the role of the classroom assistant and of the work that individual classroom assistants were undertaking with respect to supporting the curriculum and individual pupils within schools. The Council decided to establish 2 working groups at different levels. One, the cross-party working group, consisted of elected members and was attended by Hugh Fraser, Director of Education, Culture and Sport, and also latterly by myself. A task group was also established, which initially was chaired by John Ritchie, the ex-area ECS manager for Roscoe and Lochaber, and then from July 2011 until August 2012, chaired by myself. This group included membership from classroom assistants, learning support auxiliaries, parent councils, head teachers, Unison and GMB members, and ECS management, along with and attendance at several of the meetings by the then youth convener. The working group set the actions that were required from the task group, and very helpfully they asked one specific question of the task group, and that question was simply, what is actually needed in terms of classroom support, and how do we meet this need? In Highland, pupils with additional support needs are assessed to be at one of 4 different levels. The first 2 levels can be predicted on the basis of the general population and also on the level of deprivation that is served by the school. We know that around 10 to 20% of the population will have conditions such as dyslexia, dyspraxia, attention deficit disorder, language difficulties, or a moderate level of learning difficulty. However, those pupils with more significant needs that we would classify at being at level 3 or level 4 require much more careful planning and often require targeted support. We were able therefore to think of not just where the pupils were, but the level of need that we could predict would be required to be met in each school, and also to indicate those that require targeted support and which schools they attended. In April 2011, the audit of pupils within our mainstream schools indicated that these pupils with high levels of need amounted to 833 with level 3 needs and 338 with level 4 needs. When the task group looked at the way support had been allocated, it was clear that this had largely been done on a historic basis and hadn't been reviewed significantly over the years, especially in our secondary schools. This meant therefore that there were significant inconsistencies across some schools in Highland, and although need was reviewed through the annual audit and learning support auxiliaries had been allocated on the basis of this assessed need, there were still inconsistencies and inequity in how the support was spread. Classroom assistants were allocated through a different model and initially had been allocated to schools by a formula which again hadn't been reviewed for many years, and now provided inconsistent access to this type of support across Highland. The other anomaly between classroom assistants and learning support auxiliaries that was very clear to the task group when they were reviewing classroom support was that they had access to very different training opportunities, and they also had different line management structures, which meant that while on the ground they provided support to the same pupils in our schools, they had different levels of skill, different opportunities for training and development, and different structures for management. As part of the review of classroom support, it was also important for us to look more generally at not just the level of need and where that need was, but also the resource that was available to meet that need and whether this was at an appropriate level and how it could be allocated more equitably. At the time of the review, there was a significant level of resource available in Highland through support for learning teachers in both mainstream primary and secondary schools, through classroom assistants in our mainstream primary schools, and through learning support auxiliaries in mainstream primary and secondary schools and also in our special schools. The number of hours support was significant. However, what was clear was that the level of need in our schools was also significant, and the trend was towards an increase year on year over several years. The initial results of the review of classroom support provided clear evidence that the roles of both classroom assistants and learning support auxiliaries were vital to the practice of supporting pupils in our schools. Neither role, however, undertook the whole range of tasks that was required, and therefore it was agreed to create a unified post of pupil support assistant to provide the support to children in our schools. It was further agreed that this post would be integrated as part of a wider ASN review, and that we would be looking at implementation of the post by August 2012. The post was to be graded at HC4, which would mean an increase from HC3 to HC4 for classroom assistants, but for learning support auxiliaries would result in no difference in pay scale. Some learning support auxiliaries, especially those in our special schools, were already paid at HC5, and there would be no difference to this pay scale for them. The unified post of pupil support assistant was to combine the roles undertaken by learning support assistants in mainstream and special schools and those roles undertaken by classroom assistants. That wasn't to say that each pupil support assistant would do all of those roles all of the time, but there would be the option there to undertake any of those roles should they be required in the schools in which the individuals were working. On the basis of the work undertaken as part of the review of classroom support, there was a significant amount of evidence around the level of need within our schools. As a result of this information, the Highland Council agreed not to take the initial proposed savings from the classroom assistant budget, and instead to actually increase the ASN budget by £650,000 for this current financial year. They also decided to further consider an allocation model that would provide more equity of support across schools. And in September 2012, the Adult and Children's Committee agreed this allocation model, an allocation model which was based on need and was recommended by the task group. It was agreed to implement this model over the next 2 to 3 academic sessions, as it will result in some shifts in budget from area to area and from school to school. All staff are responsible for getting it right for every learner, ensuring that they are safe, healthy, achieving, nurtured, active, respected and responsible and included. The role of the pupil support assistant, therefore, is to support learning and teaching within the curriculum and also to support the personal development of learners with additional support needs. Ideally, those learners will then be able to be confident individuals, effective contributors, successful learners, and responsible citizens. The roles and responsibilities of the pupil support assistant are first and foremost to enhance the learning of all learners as part of the team supporting pupils within schools. Although a pupil support assistant may be allocated to a class due to the level of need of one or more of the learners within that class, the expectation would be that access to appropriate support would be available to all learners. there's been a significant shift away from the notion of one-to-one support and much more of an understanding that pupils make better social connections if adults remain in the background where at all possible. They'll also be less dependent on adults if the adults only support where it's required. A pupil support assistant will work as part of a team, and that teamwork depends on everybody working together, and therefore regular consultation with nursery staff, class teachers, subject teachers, peripatetic staff or outside agencies is very essential. It's very important that parents, carers and the young people themselves are seen as active partners in this process. And time therefore has to be set aside to enable that consultation so that it can be as effective as it can be. The key tasks of the pupil support assistant fall under 3 main headings: organisation and preparation of resources, curriculum support, and personal care and development. All staff have been sent a copy of the job description and the person specification for the role of pupil support assistant, and will be familiar with the individual tasks under each of these headings. It's not intended that each member of staff will undertake all of these roles and responsibilities on a daily basis, but at any time any member of staff may be called on to undertake any of these duties, whether they are generic duties or targeted duties, to support the learning and teaching and personal care and development of any individual within the school. Pupil support assistants are valued members of an additional support team in an area. They will be managed on a day-to-day basis by the head teacher of the schools in which they work, but are appointed to the team, and therefore, when need moves from school to school, so the pupil support assistant may be required to change establishments in which they work. The audit of need is undertaken on an annual basis around Easter each year, and decisions about changes in support staff for each school are made at that time. It should be the case that pupil support assistants are told in good time if and when changes are required in support levels in the schools in which they work, and whether they will be required to move from one school to another. Experience has shown that this isn't a regular occurrence, and usually whenever there is a need for moves to occur, this is done in a way which accommodates the needs of both the pupil support assistant and the pupils in question. To provide more specific information on the roles and responsibilities of the pupil support assistant, a handbook has been created which will be cited on the Support for Learners website within the next week or 2, once the final draft has been amended and completed. This handbook will provide a variety of information on different topics that will be pertinent to pupil support assistants. It will also provide forums and information about continued professional development. I would like all pupil support assistants to feel confident and skillful practitioners. Professional development is a right for every member of education staff, and schools are required through their annual staff development planning cycle to ensure that development priorities are available for pupil support assistants to participate in. To ensure that some core skills are targeted and needs addressed, the ASN team will provide a rolling programme of training over a 3-year cycle for all pupil support assistants to be able to participate in. More detailed and targeted training will be undertaken where this is required for individual pupils, and pupil support assistants that have particular interests in specific areas or particular skills that they wish to continue to develop will still be able to follow these interests and acquire further skills in particular areas through their professional development programme. Within the handbook, there is a professional development plan and a personal training log for each pupil support assistant to maintain and to complete. This will provide an indication of the core training which would be required at an awareness raising level, but will also help keep a note of the training that might be required at higher levels or additional training which may be undertaken out of interest or out of need, depending on the pupils that are being supported. All pupil support assistants should have access to a basic induction programme when they are first employed. All staff working with children should also undertake child protection training very early on as they take up a new post, and then on a regular cyclical basis, maybe every 3 or 4 years. Staff who haven't had child protection training in recent years should seek to undertake training at this point in time, and perhaps contact their head teacher or head of department to discuss whether this is a requirement for the whole school or for a wider group of staff within the school. First aid training will also be provided by the additional support needs team as a core component of professional development for pupil support assistants. This isn't training on how to be a detailed first aider, it is just a brief awareness of basic first aid requirements. Awareness of moving and handling strategies, intimate care and de-escalation skills will also be provided as short taster sessions and awareness raising for staff. Any member of staff working directly with a child or young person who requires more detailed moving and handling, specific intimate care, or who presents with challenging behaviour on a regular basis will undertake more detailed training with other members of the staff on the specific needs of that pupil. Up to now, this presentation hasn't reflected much of the pupils' views themselves. However, as part of the review of classroom support, a number of pupils were asked specifically for their views. When asked what made a good helper for them, they gave a range of views. They understandably said that their ideal helper would be kind, understanding, patient, friendly, and providing the safety and security that they would need within the classroom. They also wanted somebody who would help whenever they were stuck, someone who just would know whenever they needed help and could help them achieve their goals. But they wanted helpers who could support them in other ways, keeping an eye on them, socially being aware of what their needs were. Someone who would help them be more independent, not more dependent. Given the profile of our support staff, maybe it's not surprising that some of the boys in particular said that they would quite like to have a man supporting them instead of always being ladies. A male role model who could give positive encouragement and would enjoy sport and outdoor practical pursuits. They wanted somebody who would be interested in what they were doing, who would speak to them, but more importantly, who would listen to them, not just give advice, but who could also be approachable and trustworthy. And they would provide playground support as well as classroom support. They would provide fun ways of learning, helping use IT, and they would be imaginative and creative. Perhaps more surprisingly, whenever we asked the young people themselves, what are the qualities of the people who currently support them and look after them in our schools, they gave us a very, very similar picture. Not across the board. There were some issues and there were some comments about support that wasn't working as well as it could. But by and large, the type of support that the young people were looking for were the type of support that they currently receive. And therefore our move from learning support auxiliaries to classroom assistants to pupil support assistant isn't about the quality of the support, but it is about rationalising that support and providing more uniformity for the children in the Pupil Support Assistant Handbook therefore has a very pertinent quote within it, which states that as a pupil support assistant, you are a highly valued member of the team. This isn't an approach that can be undertaken individually. Supporting pupils requires more than one input from one individual. It is recognised that the part you play, however, is significant in promoting inclusion, fostering participation, and enabling learners to become more independent. And that has to be done in conjunction with and listening to the views of the children and the young people themselves. What I've tried to do in this brief presentation is to provide a summary of the review of classroom support, how it came about, what some of the thinking was around the task group when we were considering classroom support, and how we decided on creating the role of pupil support assistant and unifying the tasks undertaken by classroom assistants and learning support auxiliaries. This process has been fairly successful in as much as it enabled an enhancement of the additional support needs budget rather than the savings and the budget reductions that had been originally proposed. It has been much further reaching than anticipated originally, in that there has been a wider review of allocating the resource, as well as looking at the type of resource and how that resource would be used to support pupils. However, in such a brief presentation, there will, I'm sure, still be questions and queries unanswered. And if you have any additional questions or continuing concerns around your role and the new responsibilities that you have, or just simply any queries generally about supporting pupils, I'm more than happy for you to contact me directly. And the best way to contact me is probably through email. I will try and respond to all of the communications fairly quickly, and any questions or queries that I feel are quite generic in nature and would benefit others, I will put on the frequently asked questions section of the Support for Learners website. Should you have any further specific questions about your own personal circumstances or your own personal conditions of service, I would advise you to contact Carol Freer rather than myself, as Carol will have access to staffing files and information around conditions of service that I wouldn't have access to and wouldn't have knowledge of. Hopefully between us we'll be able to resolve any issues that you still have or any outstanding concerns that you might have. If there are any issues that haven't been covered at all in this brief presentation and you feel should be covered, or any queries that you might have, not just now but in the future, as the Principal Officer for Additional Support for Learning, I'd be more than happy to hear from you.